So we're good, Katie?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. So this is the Ad hoc Sustainability and Resilience Committee of the Common Council. It's February 8th at 6:01. I'm calling us to order, and I see in attendance Mr. Livingston, Mr. Goldstein, Mrs. Smith of the Common Council. So the first piece of business is public participation. Katie, is there anybody waiting to be heard from?
There's no attendees.
Okay, that means we can go straight to the approval of the minutes. We've got 3 sets of minutes, and I think I'll just call them all together. We have minutes from September 15th, 2022.
Actually, at least I don't think that's gonna work, because I mean, I'm gonna abstain from one of the November one.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right, so
Yeah.
then I guess the first set of minutes we're going to approve would be the September 15th, 2022. All in favor of the minutes being approved?
You want a motion to,
Motion to
Yeah, right,
in
right.
favor. Thank you. So 3 and 1 abstention, because I know that Ms. Smith wasn't with us. Then the next set of minutes, I'd like a motion to approve the minutes of November 9th, 2022. Josh, can you make that motion? Josh made the motion. All in favor? 2, and we have 2 abstentions. And then the last set of minutes, I would like a motion to approve the minutes of January 11th, 2023. That's Mr. Livingston making the motion. All in favor? 3 of us, and Ms. Smith is abstaining. Done. We've been wanting to get those minutes approved forever. Okay, so the next piece of business is the introduction to the Resilient South Norwalk project and the presentation of some of the project's findings. So we have Alexis and Michelle here, and thank you guys so much for attending and filling us in on this really important project.
Sure, not a problem. So I'll bring up the slideshow, but I'll just first preface, there is no findings yet, but I certainly can just go over kind of a recap of the first public workshop that was held on January 12th, where it just really covers the team assessing what's out there, looking at drainage infrastructure and how places are flooding. And then the next step would be kind of coming up with more findings, implementable plans, and how we can tackle what's being seen out there. So I won't necessarily go over the whole slideshow that was presented on the 12th. There is the recording if you want a more in-depth of exactly what was covered, but I'll pull it up and we can kind of click through the slides and ask questions, and we can briefly go over some of the content. I'll pull that up now. And just let me know if you guys have questions as we go along here. I think they primarily covered, sorry, I kind of just jumped in the middle of the slide set here. So they primarily covered heat and flooding, of how elements are affecting certain areas within South Norwalk. So they tackled it in a study area of 3 sections. So there's like a north section, the central study zone section, and the south study zone section, and tackled it kind of in that way. And then so for heat vulnerability, they kind of took out these segments to take a closer look at like how heat is affecting certain areas within the study areas. This section is like a snippet, I believe, Soundview Landing, in like the marine commercial area. So the heat in this area, there's no trees, lack of shade structures, a lot of pavement, things like that that are causing it to be really hot down in South Norwalk, as you guys know. And this area in particular, in a lot of areas in South Norwalk, there's, I think it's the 7 degrees higher than the average or normal, which was pretty high, they said. And this was done through, over the summer, they put out heat sensors throughout the city. So they kind of got like a basis of what's been occurring, and then they're using that data to take a look at these like subsections.
And that seems pretty remarkable because you're close to the water there too. So oftentimes by the water is cooler. So remarkable that it's 7 degrees hotter, even with proximity to the water.
Right. And then we go to more of like a suburban area. Woodward Ave, same, it's 7 degrees higher than the average. And then down towards Longshore Drive, there's still an increase. I think this was the 3.6 degrees higher than average, but again, they have more of like the wetlands and vegetation that's absorbing that heat, so that's kind of makes sense. Here they just summarize the 3 subsections. So I think in the next phases, they're kind of going to be looking at, I know it can be balancing the implementable plans on, private property, the right of way, what kind of design plans they could come up with to try and tackle these issues in these certain areas. So then they just show the overview again. And the red is showing like the above average areas. And then when you get to the cooler tones, that's the yellower tones are average, and then blue is below average. So then I think we jump into flood. They looked at rainfall, tidal, and storm surge, and then the stormwater networking or infrastructure. So in this study area, they chose to do the 100-year flood zone analysis on here, which is the 1% statistical likelihood of the chance of annual flooding every year, which is what most people plan for. So the impacts of storm surge, which was great throughout this slideshow. In presentation, they did a lot of like educational, like for the average resident that isn't savvy in what storm surge is, and so they really kind of get pretty rudimentary of the science behind some of this stuff that's happening. So that was great. So some hurricane surge mapping. Clearly, you can all see why South Norwalk was selected.
So wait, can you go back to that slide? So is that the historical where the surges have been? What is this?
So this is the based on the storm category. So red is category 4, category 3, 2, and 1. So it kind of goes down in severity of the storm and how much surge is expected to affect it.
So it's a surge forecast, not necessarily what has happened in the past.
Oh, okay. I was trying to decide, like, is this like what we've experienced at each of these? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a potential. So then they break down the storm surge per study area zone and what this kind of looks like if a 100-year storm does occur with 20 inches of sea level rise. What this kind of looks like.
And we should mention that, right, Alexis? That's like what people think is going to happen between now and 2050, that we'll get 20 inches of sea level rise in this
Correct.
region.
Right.
So
that is the current science predicting a 20-inch rise in your base sea level.
So you're basically talking an inch a year now.
Yeah.
I mean, scary way of putting it, a little
Yep.
less than an inch a
And-
year.
That is.
And I
a
mean,
scary
like,
way to
this
put it.
is, I think it's so, this slide is, could you mind making this a little bigger, please?
Sure. I think I can
Um,
maybe. Is that better or bigger?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that to compound this, I mean, this is also a very dense area of South Norwalk. There are a lot of people who live here, including me. So, I mean, I'm I literally live right next to Soundview Landing. So it's a shocking thing to see. Alexis, I don't know, forgive me if this is me connecting unrelated dots. I know there was a grant recently due to your work, federal grant money for a flood mitigation plan. Is this the issues that, that are obviously present here for storm surge? Is that going to be incorporated in part of that, in that plan, in that study?
Yes, yeah, so the flood resiliency funding funding that you reference will be using the Circa study as kind of a stepping stone and looking at flood vulnerability and resilience across the city. So it will not directly include as much heat study probably, and just due to funding constraints, we'll have to focus on flood, but absolutely, storm surge, sea level rise, tidal flooding, riverine flooding will all be looked at. A little bit less of a deep dive probably into infrastructure flooding,
Right.
but Public Works is also working on those issues separately.
Great, thank
And
you.
the reason that Circa chose, going back to this small area, is they looked at, they're not looking at the whole city, but they have something called their Climate Change Vulnerability Index. And that index looked at exactly what you're talking about, kind of this bisection or confluence of both the built environment. So like you said, South Norwalk is definitely a very dense environment. And then the social environment, and then the kind of other ecological factors like the coastal hardscape. So all of those reasons kind of led to just this focused South Norwalk study.
So I'll keep, is there more questions?
So when I look at this map, the different colors, purple, I don't see maybe I'm missing it. Is there a key that tells you like how deep the different colors are?
I don't think they had a legend on this one, but I'm assuming,
Yeah, the darker it gets, I'm assuming it's deeper, but I just wondered what.
Right.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
sure exactly what the depth will be, but yeah, I guess it's just on severity of, how much it's flooding in certain areas.
Oh,
This is
that
the
one has a
central
legend.
area. Oh,
There
this
it is.
There it goes.
Yep.
And then the arrows are just showing the direction of the surge.
Hmm.
So this area, which has a lot of the marsh.
A lot of the roadways are in the purple areas.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they come up with a particular scheme on how to really tackle that. Because I think there was conversations during the presentation where residents were saying that at some point Harborview was an island or something like that. So having those connections, well, obviously we've built on stuff that should be flooding naturally. So how we can kind of protect people from being able to evacuate. Another just rudimentary picture of how flooding can occur through the drainage system when there's all this rain or storm surge coming in. How can it go out back to the harbor quick enough, and it gets back? A lot of people are saying how there's water coming through the opposite ends of our drains, so that's a problem. Here they go over the certain networks they looked at, with the help of DPW and some of their layers, pointing out the outfalls and the direction of flow that's supposed to be occurring. And they'll be looking at if this is adequate, or should there be looking at other drainage mechanisms and things like that.
I'm sorry. I guess the thing I'm not quite getting here is since there's, I would just try to zoom in on this, even though I can't. I guess since a question I have is since there's been a lot of development, particularly in this area, I would imagine that a lot of the piping infrastructure and the water pipes have been largely retrofitted in big swaths of this area, or am I completely wrong about this? Like
Yeah,
in
so
terms of
that-
like draining efficacy in South Norwalk.
right. So I'd say that there have been a lot of drainage infrastructure improvements on the developed properties themselves. So with our drainage standards now, new development is
Yeah.
required to, retain and not add to our system because our system has capacity issues.
Yeah.
So that with that development is not necessarily, there's not a linear kind of increase in runoff because of that development. But then within the city's pipes themselves, no, those are not actively being
Retrofitted. Okay.
retrofitted or enlarged or anything. They certainly are maintained, and we do a lot of like sleeving and making sure that the interface between the stormwater system and the sanitary system are disconnected, because this area is so old. There are a lot of kind of close occurrences of both pipes, and so if the pipes aren't maintained, you get a mixing, and the city certainly works hard to keep our but as far as size capacity, no. And that's one of the things that this study is kind of focusing on, where when the pipe size goes down at the
Right.
end of the system, that's obviously a problem.
Right.
That's a good question, though.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So then it goes to each zones again. So this is that central zone. Then the southern piece. So the major network is really down by the marina area. So I think eventually the slides go into their study areas. So then, yeah, they show the each section that they pull out again, but they put the lens of flooding and the 100-year storm with the 20 inches, the sea level rise, just to give you a little perspective. Zoomed in, just showing you further. I think they really highlighted how the city is going to be operating just through, vehicles on the road, and how that needs to be addressed. A lot of people use Water Street, and they on a sunny day they think they're going home, and it's like it's closed off one day just because of flooding occurrence. So
Right. Tidal flooding at this point, right?
yeah.
Oh, so this is the high tides that come with the new moons and the full moons, in other words? Or is this
Yeah.
just going to be a regular tidal occurrence?
Right. So Water Street has everything coming after it. So there's
Yep.
tidal flooding or sunny day flooding, as it's called. And then this is showing higher levels of flooding during a 100-year storm event in the year 2050. So it's what's being depicted in the slide here is in 2050, immediately after a 1% chance flood.
Great.
And just I'm sorry to belabor this, but as you said, Water Street's got everything coming after this.
Mhm.
So for example, there was a relatively, I would say a rather modest rainstorm that happened a few weeks ago. There was flooding that went all the way up Haviland.
Right.
That you would not consider that a flood. That's basically a tidal overture, right?
Yeah, it's still flooding. I would consider it a flood because it's a tide derived flood with a little extra, storm water. So yeah, I think anytime that you have water that inundates an area that is not set up to be flooded, it would be considered a flood.
Mhm.
And so one of the long-term objectives is for the city to figure out where are these areas, what areas are going to be flooded. And then we have to come up with ways to better deal with it, whether it's with adaptation and making the areas that flood able to kind of be flooded, and then when they're not flooded, work better. So kind of be able to, I guess that's what resilience is, right? To be able to be
Mhm.
flooded, but then to bounce back when the water recedes. Or do we do something more that allows some areas to be flooded and other areas to not be flooded? And that's the real question is, where do we make that kind of line of, are we a city that's going to have to expect Water Street to be flooded monthly? Or should we make a plan so that it's not flooded monthly, but it's not, completely deeply flooded during large events? And that is the question that is unanswered.
Chugging along here. The next section. This is farther down on Water Street. Same idea. So then as you kind of see a theme as you go down through the study areas, it kind of becomes more vegetated and, less heat impact. And I thought it was an interesting point that they brought up how having green space, not just grass, is not always the best, because grass in itself can only absorb, I think, up to 2 inches of rain, where you really need that robust vegetation and trees and things you see in wetlands to really be absorbing that water. So just having green open space, yeah, it could be better than pavement, but at the same time, I think having plans that really make that green open space really useful.
Alexis, does Meadow Street get flooded now? I was
yeah.
surprised. Yeah.
Portions of it can during significant rain events. It doesn't get sunny days, solely tidally influenced flooding, but during significant downpours, yes.
Huh.
Portions of mostly the roadway so far that I've seen.
And Alexis, does that include Meadow to Woodward in both directions? I guess I can't see on here.
Yeah, mostly further south and to the eastern side of Meadow. not so much to the western side because it rises. You know, there's a bit of elevation there. You start to hit bedrock, actually. Most of our flooding is happening where, as Michelle mentioned earlier, you know, Harborview had been an island, and there are quite a few portions kind of between Water and Meadow that had been a much larger wetland system that was filled kind of post 1880s through the 1930s, and it's those areas that you have the most extreme flooding.
Right.
So I do have a question. I think I raised this in one of our other committee meetings. So at one point, Washington Village, you know, it flooded consistently because of Water Street, right? And the apartments were ground level. And so the new development plan was to raise everything, right? But I thought there was a conversation about fixing some of that. So it just hasn't happened to alleviate the flooding. And I think, and I think part of the plan was, well, you know, if we do have that 500-year storm or whatever it is, you know, the most that we possibly get damaged were the cars, but we'd also have folks move that. But the flooding is still happening, and it's not a little bit. And I mean, I know some of it is with the weather and all that, but I think that, you know, it's still an issue, of course.
I think what the Soundview Landing project did well is that it made its own like property like resilient rather than really fixing the adjacent neighborhood, like, you know, relieving a lot of these issues. I think it solved its own problem, but not everybody else's. That's kind of,
yeah, I mean, so there's any community is limited to the amount it can do to stop all flooding, because whenever, if water isn't going here, then you're pushing it somewhere else, right? And so that's why most of the flood regulations are based on taking the structures where people live and have all their possessions and making sure that those are elevated to an elevation that's above the risk of being inundated by floodwaters. The new development certainly does that. You know, you have to walk up into it to get to the housing. And then other improvements were made to the
road.
Park, you know, they put in the berms, the berms in the park and all of that. You're right. Go ahead.
Right. And so that elevation, the elevation of the street was elevated to raise it out of getting flooded. So Water Street, right, is going to be with the development, water from the harbor would still come up to Water Street, but the idea was that the residences themselves would be outside of the base flood elevation, and that the artery streets to get westward or to get out would be elevated to allow kind of safe passage away from the inundated areas.
I guess the part I'm not understanding and just is, I get why Water Street gets water. Hanford Place gets flooded routinely, and the few streets sort of down the way, and then you go on Day Street and it's like an entirely different story. And there really flooding does not happen on Day Street at a consistent level. And is that because and that's of course the area in and around Soundview Landing, that's because that street is elevated?
I'd have to look. I don't have all that stuff here.
No, I guess what I was trying to figure out is what's elevated. Is it the street or is it the buildings themselves? And that I guess what's being raised?
Yeah, I think both, certainly the buildings. And then I thought it was, see, now I can't remember, so I shouldn't talk.
I think
I was-
the park was enhanced too and raised a bit, right?
Right,
We've got
right.
some
Yes.
grading issues in the park. You know, so that's been raised, but there's still significant flooding, and even past Hanford Place, Concord Street still
Like
gets,
Concord.
Yes.
yes, it's still getting flooded. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Are
Yep.
there any plans of development on the other side, on the water side of Water Street?
Pending development plans on the harbor side of Water Street?
Yeah.
You,
None that I know of. Do you
Okay.
know? of?
Yeah, not that I know of.
Okay.
So I think I can distribute this slideshow if you guys don't have it. It is on the Norwalk Tomorrow's website, but I can certainly forward you guys this slideshow and the recording.
I think
If
the
you guys-
recording would be great, you know, to see all of the input, you know, that they provided too.
Yeah, and I think to get the word out on the next event will probably be in March. And then one in May. It is a shorter time period for this study since it's being done by Circa, so it's not really on our time. It's a shorter project, which is great. But yeah, the next public event will be in March, and then there'll be another one in May. There'll also be steering committee meetings, which Lisa, you're on. So we'll have some meetings in before then too. But this was kind of just a synopsis, and I think the recording, it is great to see exactly what they're kind of taking an analysis on, and next steps of, we're excited to see what they come up with in regards to what they recommend. So
And I thought we had an excellent turnout for that meeting. Close to 80 people tuned in at one point. So it just shows you the level of interest and concern from residents, and there were a lot of good comments.
Yeah, I thought the engagement was really good. I was only able to be there for part of it, but it was well attended for sure and well done. So thank you guys. Thanks for giving us a little introduction and a taste of this, and we'll definitely get it out to our constituents too, because I know it's very of interest to Josh and Darlene, and of course, it's Tom's in my district as well. Really important. Great. Well,
Great.
thanks
Keep working
guys,
thank
on it.
you.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Really appreciate this.
for
Good to
coming.
see everyone.
All right, we're going to
Yeah.
turn it over to Brian now to introduce our climate action plan.
All right, good deal. Good evening, everyone. We're excited to let you all know we're officially starting our climate action, the resilience plan. We went through the procurement as we talked about at the last meeting. Now I've contracted and I invited Noah Slovin from the selected firm SLR to provide just an introduction to the firm and the work that they're going to be doing over the next months here in this regard. So I know we've all been waiting for it. So we're looking forward to hearing from Noah. And with that, I'll kick it over to him.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks, Michelle and Alexis, I think were the ones just presenting. That's a very cool project going on kind of in parallel, and that's the in parallel projects are part of what we're trying to kind of capture with this effort here. So hello, my name is Noah Slovin. I am a senior climate resilience planner with SLR Consulting. And I'll walk you through or run through a quick presentation, like Brian said, and then open it up for questions at the end. I'll tell you a little bit about our team. I'll touch briefly on a couple of points about our experience, just to highlight a couple of things that I think are interesting, and spend most of the time talking about the approach and scope that we'll be undertaking with this project. I believe a presentation was already shared out with you. This is a bit different than that one. That was the presentation that we gave during our interview, and this has been based on that, but basically more on the actual scope is included now. in place of some other things. So our team consists of SLR Consulting and Caramita. SLR Consulting previously was Marlona McBroom. We were acquired a couple of years ago, so we have a long history of working on climate resilience in Connecticut. And are excited to continue to do so. I'm working out of our Boston office, but I started in our Connecticut office for a few years before I moved up here. So Connecticut is still the base of my clients and work, and always excited to keep working down there. We're joined by Caramita, and they bring a lot of expertise and experience with sustainability planning, carbon neutrality, and livable city concepts. And we wanted to bring them in to supplement our experience with climate resilience, specifically to also be able to have that perspective on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and sustainability and livability. So we're excited to have this team together. We have a core team of the SLR Climate Resilience team, and then a couple of staff from Caramita, but we're supported by a larger team of subject matter experts who are going to help us as we work through the kind of specific actions that are going to go into the final roadmap. We have these really experts across all different fields to think about the actionability of those recommendations and kind of realisticness of all of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Just a note that we think that strong communication is really key. That's going to be a central tenet of our approach to this project. We think of ourselves, Caramita and SLR, as one part of the consultant and City of Norwalk team working together to make this sustainability and resilience happen. So we'll be trying to communicate regularly with you like tonight. And the couple of points that I want to touch on in terms of our experience, and it was exciting to hear about this other project in part because of how it built off of things that we've worked on. SLR has worked on the Resilient Connecticut effort in a few different ways, including the CCVI 1.0 effort that led to identification of South Norwalk as one of these resilient ROARs, resilient opportunity areas. And then we just completed for circa CCVI 2.0, which fixes some problems with the last one and brings a lot more information and spreads it statewide. I don't know that that's public yet, but we're excited about that. And we've also worked on the hazard mitigation plan update for Westcog, which included Norwalk. So we have a lot of knowledge and experience and data, which is cool, that we can bring to the project as we start moving forward. The other just experience point that I want to bring that my understanding is a big part of why we were selected is that we have experience working with communities who have already done a lot of work around climate resilience planning, vulnerability assessments, action identification, and so on, and then helping the community to actually implement and turn like a laundry list of actions into a real actionable roadmap for implementation. So that's what we're going to be trying to do with you. So the approach that we have worked out, that's fine, with the redevelopment agency is kind of a three-phase approach, starting off with a project kickoff, which we've already begun. Phase one is a gap analysis, trying to identify where the city is, what's been done, and what still has to be done. That will inform developing a actionable roadmap to then fill those gaps that are identified. And then our phase three, which I put here as the top because the phasing is a little bit inaccurate here. It's really going to be built in through a few different parts of this project, but building the municipal capacity to actually take steps along that roadmap and making sure that the document that you're left with and the actions that you're left with, you have the capacity and capability to pursue those actions and implement them. We'll talk a little bit more about each of those. We already had a kickoff meeting just the other day with the redevelopment agency and one staff member from DPW, whose name I'm forgetting right now. And the other aspect of this kickoff is that we're going to have a municipal stakeholder project kickoff meeting probably in March, tentatively scheduled, or tentatively will be scheduled in March. That'll include representatives of relevant departments, boards, and commissions. And the goal there is to explain what we're doing and get buy-in and kind of ensure participation from all of the individuals and departments that are actually going to then be implementing this project. The point is here that we want the people who are actually going to be responsible for implementing each of the actions to be involved in this process throughout, and it's really focused on those people, this effort to build that capacity. So after or as we're doing that kickoff meeting, we'll also be conducting this phase 1 gap analysis. Part of that is data collection and literature review, identifying what has already been done, as well as coordinating with ongoing efforts such as the South Norwalk project, and consolidating all that information. We also added in here at the request of the redevelopment agency a zoning review. We know as part of one of those ongoing efforts that the city is updating the zoning regulations. So as one of the first tasks, we want to make sure that we can put some time to use our resilience expertise and sustainability and livability from Karamita to review those resources, to review those zoning updates and give our input into how to make sure that they incorporate those concepts. Task 3 is municipal engagement. That's where that kickoff meeting with municipal staff and representatives kicks in. And there we're talking specifically with each department about what are the ongoing efforts of that department, what are their operating procedures, how do they plan out what actions they're taking over the next year, what capabilities exist, and what are their department specific gaps. And so then this gap analysis takes the literature review and that municipal engagement to figure out, again, like I said, what's already been done, what's been identified as a vulnerability or a risk, what's been identified as a potential action, how are these plans kind of talking to these different municipal departments that are actually responsible for implementing them, and where are the gaps in this whole system so that we can start filling those gaps. Phase 2, developing the roadmap based on that gap analysis. We'll first take a look at all of the actions that have been identified from all of these different plans, the community resilience building process, the hazard mitigation plan, anything that comes out of the South Norwalk project, and create a consolidated list of action. We're not planning to identify new actions, so to speak. We're consolidating and compiling these past actions, and we may be doing a degree of kind of adding specificity, making the actions more kind of metrics-based, measurable, and achievable, and potentially putting in some phasing to larger actions to make sure they fit within this framework of a roadmap. Task 6 is then taking this list of actions and bringing it to the municipal departments responsible for implementing them, and the municipal elected officials responsible for making decisions about how these are implemented, to develop department-specific plans for implementation of these actions, as well as identify where interdepartmental collaboration needs to happen. And again, including elected officials, and then that will come back out into a sustainability and climate action roadmap. First, we develop a framework. We'll do a feasibility analysis, like I said, for each action. What are the barriers to that action that might exist? And that's where we'll bring in all this expertise from our deeper SLR and Karamita bench. What are the permitting challenges? What are the engineering challenges? Is this actually feasible, or how can we make it more feasible? And then that turns into a final roadmap, and that'll be followed up with some public engagement. I think I forgot to mention that with task 3 before, with the gap analysis, that'll also involve public engagement. So those are 2 public engagement activities as part of this scope. And then finally, phase 3, municipal capacity building. We have 4 activities as part of this, and we're still working with Brian and his team on figuring out exactly how everything's going to work together in the schedule. But these 4 tasks will be part of the municipal capacity building phase, a municipal training exercises, and we'll be working out what we'll be training staff on. There are a variety of potential topics, from Climate Change 101, how does this all work, to more, practical, what are the funding sources, how do I apply for a grant from NIFWIF, things like that. So there's a variety of different things that we can do, and we'll figure that out. Task 8.2, public and stakeholder education framework. This is not actually conducting education or really developing the content of an education campaign, but preparing a framework for an education campaign that would include a schedule of potential schedule of events, what types of topics to talk about, different formats for giving over that information, whether it's a Facebook post or an in-person meeting or a annual outdoor fair type thing. So that think about what an annual education campaign, if annual is the kind of basis that we decide to do this on. This again, we'll be working with RDA and all of you to decide how all of this looks, and some templates for that, so that at the end of this, the city is ready to go, take this information, add the content, and actually carry out the campaign. 8.3, integration crosswalks. These are basically guides that show how the different concepts, recommendations, vulnerabilities, and findings of sustainability and climate action work that the city has done, how those fit into other municipal planning documents and frameworks, how it fits into the POCD, how it fits into the capital improvement plan, and so on. And then administrative capacity development. This probably will end up being kind of intertwined with some of the other municipal engagement efforts that we're doing in task 3 and task 6. But this would be conducting a review of department-specific operating procedures, from procurement of projects to prioritization of activities over the course of the year, to identify opportunities to really integrate sustainability and climate action considerations into all operations of those departments. So like I said, we are still, we're in early phases here. We just had our kickoff meeting. So the schedule is not set in stone, I would say. But this is roughly what we had presented in our proposal, and we're doing pretty well on schedule, to be honest, which is entirely thanks to you all moving quickly to get the project started. So we've begun the data collection and review task. We want the municipal stakeholder kickoff meeting to be in March, and we're gonna work with Brian to make that happen. And then we're gonna do the initial review of zoning regulations in April, so that the feedback is able to be incorporated into the update based on the schedule of that process. Those are the 3 things that we are really sure of. And then over the spring and summer, we'll be working on the gap analysis, developing that consolidated list of actions, and then holding an implementation workshop with municipal staff. I won't walk through everything else, but basically our tentative plan is to wrap this up by the end of 2023. And municipal capacity building, trying to build that in kind of in the later half of the year. Some of it may run over after that final roadmap is developed, since kind of by definition, some of that depends on the information that's developed through that through that roadmap. And Brian, we can
ask a question.
Oh yeah.
In terms of your municipal capacity, one thing and I think others have questions about as well, is how do we implement this in the city in terms of having, a structure to move forward with? Either it's somebody who's in charge of it. Are you going to be looking at how to incorporate this on an ongoing basis in the city structure?
Yes, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. And maybe I didn't kind of identify specifically where that would be in the scope. But that's our vision for this end goal of this project, and that and the roadmap would be identifying specific individuals within specific departments that are responsible for specific actions, and that may mean determining with the city that the way to go is to assign a new position that's kind of at the head of climate resilience and climate action, and they'll be in charge, or maybe identifying an existing position that will take that on, or it may involve assigning a variety of different individuals different tasks. That will be part of what we're working out.
Great, thanks.
I had a
I'm going to
question
stop
for-
sharing so people can see each other, but let me know if you want to see a slide.
I'm curious a little bit about how you envision public engagement, because obviously we're working so hard on bringing the public up to date with some of these things and explaining why some of this work is so important, even though, sometimes it's hard to describe, like why we shouldn't be using leaf blowers and adding to the, these types of things. So what engagement what are some of the ideas that you have about the public engagement?
And
aspect?
not to jump in real quick, can I provide a little context on this one? Because Noah and I discussed this quite at length, so I think it might be helpful, Lisa. That's okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when we were actually doing procurement, I was thinking to introduce this. There was a lot of firms that provided a lot of perspectives, which we really benefited from. A lot were some focus on external, solely external outreach, some focus more on internal in terms of how we work with departments. And based on the feedback that we all discussed as a result of the community resilience building workshops, I almost make I equate it to needing to put our oxygen mask on before assisting others. So we wanted to really take a look at both sides of engagement through this this process. So that's how we structured the program. So basically, we have an internal engagement component, which Noah talked about, for municipal capacity building, and basically doing working with staff throughout the city to understand what everyone's doing and how that'll feed into the administrative structure that we ultimately recommend. And then what we thought about in terms of public outreach is obviously to have the public kept up to speed along the way with some structured outreach events. So one being, okay, this is what we're doing tonight, right? We want to make sure that the people are aware of what the plan, goals, objectives, and process is going to be. Then coming back with some findings after we do the gap analysis. Once we have an idea, we kind of had our consulting support look into what has been currently done and what is planned, and then a final report presentation. But I think the real value add, though, is what Noah talked about in terms of this sort of municipal, the capacity building, the component about educational materials, and talking about how we could structure outreach events post this to help, really focus on external engagement after we have, the path laid for the city, if that makes sense. And no, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
I can just add that in terms of like the specific for these two engagement things, I think, Brian, we were talking about a virtual workshop that we would do at those two events to involve the public, and like Brian's saying, it would be more information sharing than information gathering than I think a more bigger public engagement effort would want to be. But as Brian was explaining, for the purposes of this project, we think that's sufficient. The phase 3 one, during the gap analysis, I think we would want to get some input from the public into kind of their own perceptions and experience about what's been done and what's left to be done.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because there's so much work to do internally before we really outreach. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I'll add, because not only to explain, but also to kind of get help as we go forward. I know there are other projects with engagement efforts going on, and engagement fatigue is definitely a challenge, and engagement confusion could certainly be a challenge. So we'll want to be coordinating with those other projects to not, have a South Norwalk resilience meeting on Tuesday and a resilience plan meeting on Thursday, and so on. So we'll work with the other projects to make sure that happens.
Yeah, it makes sense if you phone in and listen in, to get some information. It's probably the same group of people who would be talking at your event anyway. You might as well
Right,
Just
right.
Phone in.
We could combine the two, yeah.
Exactly. Other committee members, I know that Tom has to go because we've got the 6th taxing district meeting, so he's racing over there. Are there other topics that Josh or Barbara, Darlene might want to cover?
And I know there's a Rec and Parks meeting in a few minutes, but I mean, the only thing I would say is let's make sure to have an open line of communication. The only thing I was thinking of and didn't hear was that obviously, Brian, I know there was a big project with the Nature Conservancy that was done, frankly, I thought, to sort of expedite the first part of this. And I didn't really hear about whether that's actually going to be happening or whether there's going to be a lot of duplication of efforts here. Obviously, you know, I think we liked the veracity of Nature Conservancy's work. But I didn't know if there's going to be some duplication of work for that first stage here.
Yeah, and I could talk to that a little bit. So that was a big, part of the RFP even that we issued. So the CRB report was attached to the RFP. So the firms responded in terms of how they were going to do just what you're asking, Josh. And NOAA actually has done that before. I think it was the town of Groton where they basically took a CRB and then turned it into a larger plan. So I'll let him talk a little bit about that, but that was very critical to our discussions and negotiations so that we achieved that sort of economy of scale.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And just to clarify, in case anyone's a stickler, it was the city of Groton, not the town of Groton. Yeah, so our goal, similar to what we did with the city of Groton, is to look at the CRB as basically the starting point. That would be that task 2.1, the data review and so on. A large part of that would be basically taking the CRB report and the list of actions and the matrix that kind of prioritizes them and figure out, what's already been recommended and what's been moved forward and what hasn't been moved forward and why. That's in short, that's like the big question is what's been done from that plan and what hasn't and why, but we're gonna expand that to look at other plans like the hazard mitigation plan and ongoing efforts as well. But the goal is not to I forget the word you said, but not to double efforts, but to build
Yeah.
up.
Duplicate efforts, yeah.
And
So
I-
Josh,
And I realize also there are obviously a lot of balls in the air. I mean, we were just talking a few minutes ago with Alexis about a flood mitigation plan that's going on that was federally funded that's going on right now. I realize that there are a lot of balls in the air and that the Nature Conservancy certainly didn't cover everything. But this was something I knew that we had discussed before, so I just wanted to hear about it, and I'm all good.
I mean, we sort of used the Nature Conservancy study to be the basis of the RFP.
Right.
So it was useful and you've got it in your hands, Noah. So
Yes, yeah.
we're in good shape. Well, I too have to be at the 6th taxing meeting and the Park and Rec.
There's a
meeting,
seventh one?
both at the,
Yeah.
both at the same time at 7.
Yeah.
So without further ado, thank you so much for coming and giving us an overview of what's going on. We're so excited for your work. We've been dreaming of this for years. So it's
Yep.
finally coming to
Great.
fruition. We're thrilled.
Well, we're very excited to work on it. So thank
And
you.
we're excited to work with you.
Very. So thank you very much. So sadly, we're going to have to
Thank you.
call down the meeting. So a motion to adjourn, somebody? Josh, got it. All right. Thanks, team. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much for all staying until 7.
All right,
Thanks.
take
Good
care,
night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Good night.